Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Asia-focused edition of SAF Insights. I'm Lauren Moffitt, August Asia Biofuels and Net Zero Deputy Editor based in Singapore. Today, I'll be speaking with Phil Moore, EcoCeres Global Head of SAF, to discuss some recent issues affecting SAF globally and regionally, and the implications for the nascent Asian SAF markets. So thank you very much for joining me today, Phil.
Thank you for the invite.
Thanks. So perhaps we can start with a brief introduction on EcoCeres for those listeners who might not be aware of the company. So how much SAF and HVO is EcoCeres currently producing in Asia, and how are you expecting to grow in the next couple of years?
For sure. So EcoCeres came from a company called Town Gas, which is a Hong Kong utility company, and has had significant investments in the last few years from Kirigen Capital, a UK company, and Bain Capital, a US company. So today it is a Anglo-US Hong Kong company. We have a refinery in China that produces around 350,000 tons of renewable product, split between HVO and SAF, made from the heifer process. And we have two cellulosic ethanol production plants also in China. Moving forward, we are currently under construction of a second refinery in Malaysia that will actually produce 420 KT of renewable product, and that's due to come online second half of next year.
All right, thanks a lot. So I think it's safe to say that the Asian market for SAF has been generally focused on selling into Europe at the moment as the region that already has mandated demand and further mandated demand coming online next year. And it's been quite a tough time for SAF producers recently. The UK has begun an anti-dumping investigation into biodiesel and HVO from China several months after the EU launched its own probe. And at the end of last week, the EU delayed again announcement of any provisional anti-dumping duties on Chinese biofuels. So I'd be interested to know how EcoCeres view these investigations and what the risk is to SAF produced in Asia targeting the EU market.
Yeah, sure. Interesting question. Thank you. Obviously, we were surprised that HVO and SAF were included in the investigation. The investigation in the EU was at the request of the EBB. It was around biodiesel. And as everybody knows or should know, that HVO and particularly SAF are not biodiesel products. So it has been included. There's been an investigation. I can't obviously talk about that too much because it's an ongoing investigation with the results will soon be announced. But, from a personal point of view, I think that it's counterproductive to have introducing a mandate in the EU with what can only be fairly termed as harsh penalties for non-compliance at the same time that the same EU is talking about limiting the supply of the SAF. So I think from an airline point of view and an airline customer point of view, it's a worrying development.
And as you say, we'll need to wait for a couple of more weeks to hear the result from the EU side on the provisional duties, at least.
Absolutely, and and there's mixed. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody is trying to second guess what happens there. We certainly hope that the EU sees the strength of our argument and also the supporting arguments from airlines that SAF should be excluded from this. You cannot use biodiesel in an aircraft, but we will see how it comes out.
So just before the UK announced its own anti-dumping investigation, it also published its own SAF mandate and targets in late April, which have been largely applauded by stakeholders in the industry. Unlike the EU, which has a stepped mandate increase every few years, most think that this is a positive development for the industry as it has an annual mandate increase. So obviously, disregarding the anti-dumping investigation that's ongoing, how do you view the potential of the UK market with their mandate in place Does it look like an attractive export market for Asian producers?
Yeah, for sure. It's great that the UK is taking these steps, right? It brings some clarity to an important aviation market, and the UK has been and will remain an important market to EcoCeres. I would say, my experience is that, in particular, British Airways, they've been trying to do something on renewable fuels for many, many, many years, well before some of the dominant producers, and they're quite committed to it, and I applaud that. And finally, getting some support from the British government is going to be very helpful for them. So we like that. At the end of the day, more countries should follow.
And if we turn to look at the Asia Pacific policy landscape, obviously we've had quite a big announcement this year from Singapore that they're targeting 1% SAF use from 2026. More recently, Australia in May announced funding for biofuels research and certification development in its 24 to 25 budget, although it still lacks any relevant mandate. While Indonesia has actually said that it plans to finalize a roadmap for SAF development imminently. So how do you view these and any other developments in the Asia region and the implications for regional SAF producers?
Yes, I expect to see a number of new initiatives coming up. Japan has a mandate. They've signaled well that that's going to be 10% by 2030. New Zealand was actually on the cusp of introducing both a road and aviation mandate prior to their elections and change of government. The Singapore initiative is very interesting. I think a lot of different countries are going to watch how that develops, because they've managed to come up with some function that supports the airline, without it being punitive in cost. And, I think all of these things are good, but all of these regions are likely to have different approaches. So if you look at Malaysia and Indonesia, they're very rich in feedstocks, but their feedstock policy is probably going to be very different to what it is in Europe and what it is in the US. If you're a palm oil producer, you're probably going to take a much more liberal approach to the feedstock from palm derivatives than what the European Union does. And I think we all have to respect different governments for the policies they put in place. And as a producer, we'll work with each of those governments on the regulations that they have, particularly around Australia. To answer the question there, the Australian government obviously sees itself with some rich natural resources. They have a lot of sunshine and a lot of empty land. So they are quite interested in eSAF, but they also have agricultural waste from the sugarcane industry. And that's where something like our own cellulosic ethanol technology can help as well.
So, yeah, as you mentioned, the waste crops, I'd like to speak a bit more about that. So the EU actually recently added cover crops and crops grown on severely degraded land as an Annex 9 Part A feedstock when used to produce SAF, which has also been applauded by the industry. Obviously, we're going to be facing a very tight feedstock supply situation, especially as we move to 2030 and beyond, and higher mandates that will be coming in. So you obviously see potential for these feedstocks in Australia. Are there any other countries in APAC which you think can benefit from these new feedstocks?
Yeah, of course. So India for sure, maybe even the Middle East. I think we will definitely need to, or the EU will definitely need to reassess their feedstock policy as we go forward. I know that if you read the legislation, it's very clear that they have a strong belief in eSAF and want to promote that. But, we're not quite there at the moment. It's a nice technology. It's a great idea, and people are working on it, but you couldn't meet those ambitions based on today's technology. So we do need cover crops. We need probably to look more towards CORSIA feedstock requirements rather than the narrower EU ones. And then there's the alcohol to jet pathway, which is going to open up a lot more feedstock possibilities to make SAF.
And what has been really EcoCeres' approach to feedstock sourcing so far? And are you doing any work on any of these novel feedstocks?
Yes, we are. Our approach is that that we only use waste and residue. There are no competing food crops in our feedstocks, which probably sets us aside from some of the other leading producers. We'd like to keep it that way, and that's on our heifer. So most of our production at the moment is certainly for the SAF, it's all Yucca, 100%. On the HVO, we also use POME, but we're looking at other waste streams as well. And on the cellulosic ethanol, we're one of the few companies in the world that can make ethanol from proper waste. So if you think of sweet corn, generation 1 ethanol is made from the yellow bit, which is food crop, and ours is made from the empty cob that normally would be thrown in the bin. You can also, in an Australia situation, you could be using sugarcane waste to make ethanol, and then that ethanol, of course, can go into the ethanol to jet process. So we're very, very keen on the feedstock approach.
And obviously, you're looking at cellulosic ethanol to jet. The US has actually drafted a legislation recently that paves the way to allow corn ethanol to jet produced in the US to obtain federal incentives for production and consumption. So how do you view this legislation as a cellulosic ethanol producer that might be looking to sell into the US market? Do you see that it will make it harder to compete in the US market?
Not really. I think that there's always going to be customers that would prefer to have the second generation ethanol.
Mm.
Even in the US, right? So obviously it's very easy to make ethanol, and that's what's happening today in the US from crop that competes with food. And that's essentially today it goes into the gasoline pool. The question is, what will the airlines and the airline customers think? So, it's certainly in a European situation, I can't imagine that that first generation ethanol will be very popular for SAF. It can well be that that the same applies in the US, that the people that are flying on the aircraft, the customer wants a solution that is more sustainable.
Okay, so you do see kind of a two-tier market
Yeah,
still
absolutely.
in the US.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep. I absolutely, right? And we respect everybody's approach to it, right? The same way as I respect that Malaysia and Indonesia going to look at the resources that they have available, so will the US.
For sure, makes sense. And if we turn now to look a bit at the tracking and tracing for SAF, which is pretty crucial in the current market where we still have a lot of voluntary demand driving uptake of SAF. So the IATA announced in June that it will establish a SAF registry to help airlines track and prove SAF purchases, regardless of where it's produced. Will this be helpful for securing near-term off-takers in regions like Asia, where demand is still largely voluntary? And how realistic do you see the proposed Q1 2025 timeline for launching this registry?
I think it's a great idea insofar as it reduces logistic costs. At the end of the day, we have one problem, which is CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's one atmosphere. It doesn't really matter if you reduce the CO2 in the skies above China or whether or not you reduce the CO2 in the skies above Switzerland. It's still the same reduction with the same positive result. However, so that's a good thing, and the IATA SAF registry is a great idea, but unfortunately, individual countries have signed up to individual CO2 reduction targets, and the two are not aligned. So although it's a great idea and scientifically sound to reduce the CO2 emissions wherever, it doesn't have to be country specific. But the reality is that France has made one commitment, Germany another, Australia another, US another, New Zealand another. Each country has made their own commitments, and each of those countries will want to count aviation reductions as part of their solution. So I'm in favor of the IATA initiative because it makes sense and it will reduce costs and makes cleaning up aviation easier. But I wonder how that sits with individual governments and how does the EU view this, right? As an example, right? How does reducing emissions through SAF supplied and consumed in Asia help the EU meet their reduction targets would be the question that I would ask.
So do you have any other views on kind of the best approach for tracking improving greenhouse gas emission reductions through SAF use? And is there any other initiatives that EcoCeres is involved in or looking at for this?
I think we very much try to support our customers. The customers are the obligated parties. We're just a producer. So, we try to follow what they do and help them meet their commitments. We're not lobbying for particular policies or coming up with solutions for them, right? We're a provider in the chain. But as I always say, I see the customers as the heroes, not the producers. So, we'll support them as and where we can.
So at the moment, it's kind of whatever approach your customers are looking to use, you'll be kind of happy to try that.
Yeah, we'll support them, right? If it is that IATA are successful in having a registry, we'll welcome that and we'll support that. If it is that they're not successful and it has to be regional or country specific, we'll also support that. I personally believe that we should have a mandate that's global. It would help the airline industry. It would certainly help reduce emissions. Something more like you have in marine with IMO. I personally would much rather have like a 10% mandate across the whole globe for all aviation rather than 70% in Europe and 10% in Japan and nothing in somewhere else. Because one of the challenges for airlines is how do they compete? So if you're a European airline and you're flying to Asia and you're going to be loading mandated SAF for your flight from London to Singapore, you're at a disadvantage with an airline that can have a stopover in a non-mandated country. So if it was mandated globally, then that wouldn't happen.
And with quite a lot of collaboration within the aviation sector,
For sure.
through associations like IATA, maybe we will see something like this come about in the near future.
Yep, and that we would really welcome, right? That I think that's the way forward, right? A global approach.
Yeah, for sure. We've spoken a bit about the mandates, the feedstock situation, issues of tracking and tracing. Are there any other specific challenges to building the SAF ecosystem in the Asia region that you'd like to point out, and maybe how EcoCeres has worked to overcome these?
Well, Asia's it's a big growing market for aviation. Everybody knows that. And it is difficult to keep on top of every different country's policy changes. We are busy building refineries. As I said at the beginning of the discussion, we're already building our second one in Malaysia, and we're taking final investment decision over the summer on a third refinery. There could be more. We believe very much in the growth of demand in the APAC region, and we're ready to invest significantly to try and meet that demand. Obviously, we're not the only ones, and we're not able to come anywhere near meeting the full problem by ourselves. The industry needs a lot of players and a lot of different solutions, and we're just one of them. But yeah, Asia's a very dynamic region, Asia Pacific, and unlike the EU, where it's one big block, or the US, another big block, there's more challenge because everybody's going to have a different approach.
For sure. So again, collaboration and maybe more of a unified approach within the
Yeah,
bloc would be
yeah,
helpful.
exactly. We're obviously, as a Hong Kong company, we're part of the panel that is talking about and trying to find the right solution for Hong Kong Airport. We talk to different governments and on a regular basis try to help them as best as we can, right? We're very free to give as much help and advice as we can. We try to give that advice impartially because, that's what it needs to be. We don't want to be self-interest here. It's a big problem that people are facing, and we want to try and be the best player we can in that, and giving the best help we can.
And I'd like to finish the discussion touching on pricing in the SAF market because it has been a tough year for producers, I think in Asia and elsewhere. We have seen SAF prices drop to record lows this year, although we've seen some improvement in recent weeks. And we really see this as been driven by the global production capacity ramping up more quickly than demand growth this year. So some other producers in the region have pushed back bringing projects on stream. And we've also seen co-processing gain increasing attention in the APAC region as an alternative to near-term investment in standalone plants, which obviously have a higher capex. So yeah, I'd just like to get your views on the outlook for supply demand next year. Are you confident that we'll see this rebalance in 2025 as we have more mandates coming online in Europe?
Yeah, for sure. I think the term record lows is possibly an overstatement, especially in a market that's rapidly developing. And I think 2024 has been a bit of a funny year. It's like the phony war. Everybody's waiting for the European mandates to start. There's been some very recent announcements, even this week, about some companies halting their investment decisions or just stopping builds, which, is decisions that they have taken. They're quite different to ours. We are a company that is rapidly expanding and growing. So we're very confident in the market. Others are not so confident. From our sales book keeps growing, right? We have no problem selling our product. Obviously that's a very happy place for us to be, but I am fully confident in the market. I was talking to a customer the other day, and they were saying that they were concerned on how they're going to get enough SAF to meet their targets next year. I'm not concerned about it. I think that there's also been some confusion in the market on the S&Ds this year because one of the more dominant suppliers were not able to meet the targets that they had set themselves with their new refinery. And of course that created some uncertainty in the market. But, they seem to be solving that now, and I think that the market's more or less balanced, to be honest.
And yeah, we definitely agree, I think, on the supply demand rebalancing next year. And quite quickly, we might see, like you said, supply not adequate to meet demand when these mandates come in. So yeah, I agree that it's looking definitely more positive next year for SAF producers. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think some of the SAF price drop, right, was pulled down a little bit by the HVO price. When the HVO mandate in Sweden was reduced, then that meant there was quite a lot of tickets available in Q1. And just like on the fossil fuel, it's quite normal if you see a drop in diesel road fuel that you'll expect to see a drop in the kerosene price as well. I think the same thing happens in renewables to a degree. So SAF got pulled down a little bit with the HVO. And then, one of the challenges that we have in the industry is, we don't have a derivatives market, so it's very difficult to hedge. We look forward to that. There's a lack of liquidity at the moment on the pricing mechanisms, which we want to see change, right? And I think it will change. It's natural that it will change when, especially already next year with more activity with the mandates, you'll see more liquidity in that market. And and that will stabilize prices and make it easier for people to make investment decisions and give more security of supply to the customers.
And just a quick plug from our side then that for sure we're looking to to launch hedging instruments for SAF, especially
Absolutely.
for SAF for Barra. Yeah, as soon as exchanges see and the market sees that our benchmarks are liquid enough, yeah, that's something we're targeting as soon as possible. So hopefully that should help the market to some degree.
It will indeed, and we look forward to supporting that. It's something that the market needs. I know that Argus has been also bold in setting up the quotes, and we appreciate that. Take some time, right? When there's not a lot of volume, pre-mandates, then it's difficult. But I think going forward, it'll become much more normal.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you very much for speaking to me today, Phil. Is there any final thoughts or anything you'd like to add before we close off today?
Well, thank you again for the opportunity. I'm always happy to talk about SAF. It's I'm passionate about flying. I come from the other side of the world. It would be a very, very long swim or 6 months in a leaky boat to get home if I couldn't fly. I think SAF is an important part of the solution to climate change, and it's one that we all need to support because life without travel would be quite different, and we would lose a lot if people couldn't fly the way that they are used to. So always very pleased to talk about.
I agree, and thanks very much. It's been very insightful, and it's been great to have you on the podcast. So really appreciate it, and thanks again. And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in to this episode of SAF Insights. We'll look forward to have you join us next time.